How to make the IRS an offer they can't refuse. Hi, my name is Carlos Samaniego. I'm the founder of Tax Debt Consultants. I wanted to give you a 15-minute walkthrough the big ideas inside my new book, second edition of How to Make the IRS an Offer They Can't Refuse. Now, when I originally wrote this book back in 2019, it's become a bestseller. We've had almost 8,000 people download the book. But what I wanted to do is because this book has become so popular, and if you're watching this, one of two things are true right now. Either you have a tax problem and you're trying to figure it out, or you know somebody who has a tax problem and is trying to figure it out. What I'd like to do is just go ahead and first just share with you the cover of this book. This is the new cover of the new book, How to Make the IRS an Offer They Can't Refuse. And if you downloaded the original book, the original 2019 cover is slightly different, as you can see. This is always going to be a classic and maybe even a collector's item someday. Hopefully you like the new cover of this book. But here's the thing. As I said earlier, if you got this book, if you're watching this video or thinking about getting this video, it's either you have a tax problem, you're trying to figure it out, or you know somebody who's having a tax problem and you want to help them try to figure it out. Either way, you've come to the right place. And what I'm going to do is just tell you what's in this book, why I wrote this book, and what the IRS doesn't want you to know. And believe it or not, they don't really want you to know. But by the time I'm done, you're going to have a clear picture of your situation. Let's just jump into this. Here's the thing, guys, how I got here. So way before I became a tax professional, I spent years as an EMT in back of an ambulance. And actually, even before that, at the ripe age of 17 and a half, I joined the U.S. Army Psychiatric Technician School in the U.S. Army and eventually graduated from the Army Medic program. So, and then after that, I spent 11 years here in the Inland Empire. For those of you guys that don't know Southern California, it's basically the San Bernardino Riverside area. And that's where I spent my early part of my career. Fast decisions, bad information, high pressure. I loved that type of environment at that young age. It was just fun to do. So for me, triage wasn't a philosophy, it was survival. That I was actually doing that type of work. I was building my career. I didn't file my own tax returns for 8 years while I was an EMT. And not because I didn't know about it, but because, you know what? I was afraid. Your taxes, and then 2 years, and 2 years becomes 4, 6. And for me, it was 8 years. And for those of you guys who haven't filed tax returns in years, you understand that. You went maybe a year or two, you realize you didn't file, and the next thing you know, you put it off, and a couple of years turns into 10 years. That's how fast it can happen. But one thing that I kept on telling myself during this time frame of my life was, you know what? I'm going to take care of it. What ends up happening is those envelopes keep on coming. You stop opening them, the penalties start compounding. And then eventually you get to the point you just stop looking. You just hide the envelopes, put the envelopes away, put them in the file. And then at one time or another, you just stop opening them altogether. This is what I call the internal bleeder. Not the IRS, not the collector, me. The internal bleeder is you that's watching this. For me, at that time, it was me. It was my own delay, making a manageable problem and turning it into a crisis, one opened envelope at a time. The moment I finally decided to deal with my tax issues, I had walked into the office of who I now called a mentor of mine, Ernie. He was a former IRS agent, turned enrolled agent. He pulled all my transcripts together, ran the numbers, and he finally sat down and told me the truth. And for the first time in years, I actually knew how bad the problem was and how bad the problem wasn't. And that's the thing. You know, when a problem's on a paper, it's something that you can fight. Ernie was able to fix my problem. And my wife told me I had an obligation to do that for other people. And in the book, I share the entire story, how I went those 8 years not filing, how I ended up marrying my wife and didn't tell her about my unfiled tax returns. All of that is in this book. And this is why I decided to write that book. And Liz is the one that kind of inspired me to write that book, to share that story, because I'll be honest with you. For the first few years of my life, I did not share my story of my tax problems, my unfiled tax returns. It was an embarrassment to me, just like you might be sitting there at home watching this and you're embarrassed by it. And I realized that my embarrassment, hundreds, if not thousands of people. And that's what it's done. Literally to date, I've had almost 10,000 people download this book. Tell me the same thing, is that it was the beginning of them finally getting their tax debt resolved. Because one of the things I say in my practice all the time, the IRS is not your biggest danger. It's not. It's the delay. It's the delay that you're dealing with of not dealing with the problem. The real villain, and I want you to write this down, IRS does not need to do a single thing to you to make your problem worse. You don't have to do anything. All they got to do is wait. Because as you wait to deal with your problem, that penalty clock, I call them the penalty pig, it keeps on running. Whether you call the IRS or not, the penalties, the interest are accumulating 3%, 5% every single day of every single month. While you wait, the IRS's collection machine keeps on adding, and the collector, who I call that's the IRS, doesn't need to lift a finger to do anything. See, you're doing most of that work for them. That internal bleeder, you not doing nothing, that delay, that paralysis, the story that you're telling yourself that someday this is going to get better, that is actually making the problem worse. There is not a better moment to deal with this. There's only one thing. You must make that decision. The decision is to move and to do something. You watching or downloading my book, if you have not downloaded the book, you can get it at taxdebtbook.com. But the decision to download that book is the most important decision that you've made in your life, is because you're moving in a direction to get the tax problem resolved. That's a decision. When you pick up the phone and call our office to book an appointment to have that first discussion about your tax challenges, getting your tax debt resolved. I hope you really take that in. So you just watching this video is taking that step. You're making momentum of solving your tax problems. Now, let's talk about a couple of things. In chapter 3, the book, and I don't have an actual physical copy of the new book yet. It's on Kindle currently. And if you're watching this, you'll be able to download the book at taxstepbook.com for free. You get a free PDF version of it. You want to order the book on Amazon, you can do that as well. But in chapter 3 of the book, I lay out the full menu. What most people believing when they have a tax problem, they think that there's only one option: to pay everything they owe or face the consequences. That's what everybody thinks. I got to pay whatever I owe. I got to pay that full balance. And here's what a lot of people don't understand. Sometimes those balances are incorrect. They're wrong. Just the IRS just made up numbers. The state of California just made up numbers. So chapter 3, I talk about the different choices that are possible to you once you decide to move forward to help resolve your tax problems. Here's just a list of them. One, obviously the simplest option is if you can afford to pay your balance in full, be done with it. That's the cleanest, fastest way to get rid of it. If you got the assets and the income to do that, pay off the balance in full. If you're unable to pay off the balance in full, the IRS offers an installment agreement where there's a monthly payment plan that the IRS will take. Now, if there's a thing called a streamlined installment agreement that the IRS, it's an option the IRS has that, you know what, it's possible to resolve your tax debt if it's under $250,000, where we may not need financial disclosures. But the challenge there is that if you don't deal with this in a timely manner, they're going to require the financial disclosure. Currently not collectible. The ability of not being able to, you don't have the ability to pay the IRS anything. That is an option. And we do that every day for clients. Partial pay installment agreement. Maybe you can afford to pay something, but you can't pay the entire balance of the entire amount on a monthly basis. Offer and compromise. The book is called How to Make the IRS an Offer They Can't Refuse. Offer and compromise is where you settle debts for less than what you owe. It's what you always hear on the radio. It's what a lot of these different companies, or what we call offer mills, they try to make it sound like everybody qualifies for them. Here's the thing: not everybody qualifies for them. In fact, about 2/3 of all offers are denied because they never qualified in the first place. Yet companies will take advantage of you if you don't know what the IRS is looking for. So That's an option. Penalty abatement. Maybe we can get some of the penalties removed. Innocent spouse relief. That's basically where a spouse didn't know or wasn't responsible for the tax debt. Statute of limitation expiration. Whoa, this is a secret. IRS really doesn't want you to know about this thing. Is that, did you know that certain IRS debts expire after a certain amount of time? And bankruptcy. Believe it or not, people can bankrupt tax debt. Now, we can't give you legal advice in bankruptcy, but we can give you an idea of what tax debt may be eligible for bankruptcy. So, those are the top 10 most common options that we talk about in the book. Again, most people walk around thinking that there's only one option. And this whole entire system is built on that ignorance. The book is not. When you read the book, you're going to completely understand what we're talking about. Now, let's talk a little bit. Again, we were talking about the offer and compromise. This is the most important thing I will say in this video. The tax relief industry, or what I call the promise thief, it's in its worst form. It's made billions of dollars selling the average taxpayer that owes money this dream that the IRS is just going to settle their debt for pennies on the dollar or for a fraction of the dollar. You know what I'm talking about. If you're up late at night because you can't sleep because you're thinking about your tax debt, you're seeing it on TV, right? Settle your debts for pennies on the dollar, or you're listening to on the car radio as you're driving home. I know every day I drive home up the mountains here, I hear these one commercial after another. Now, here's what's crazy about this entire situation. The promises are made before anybody even looks at your file. Now, no legitimate company can tell you that you're going to qualify for this pennies on the dollar without legitimately looking at your entire file. And here's the truth. The IRS calculates something. It's called a reasonable collection potential, or here's what that basically means is that the IRS is they're looking at your income, they're looking at your assets, they're looking at your expenses and your allowable expenses that the IRS is going to allow you. The IRS doesn't allow all your expenses. If you're paying hundreds of credit card payments and all kinds of luxury items, they're not going to say, oh, we're going to let you pay that and not pay us. So there is a way for us to calculate what that number is. It's not a number that we pull out of the air. Oh, 10% or just a made up number. There's an actual calculation that is used to come up with an offer and compromise. And bottom line is most people don't qualify for an offer and compromise. And when they do, it's not always the right tool. So sometimes they may qualify for an offer and compromise, but it may not be the right tool at the time. So what most people actually need is not an offer and compromise, but they need the right diagnosis of their situation and then the right tool to use at that point in time based on their situation. Sometimes it might be an offer. More often than not, it's probably a payment plan, a partial pay installment agreement, or even maybe a currently not collectible status. Now, the goal is never to file an impressive sounding resolution. Bottom line, that is not our goal. The goal is to get the IRS off your back permanently using whatever your math supports. Now, the promise thief, these are these other companies out there. They collect the retainer before running the numbers. They tell you they're going to get rid of all your tax debt, pay me $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Stories of clients that paid up to $40,000 to 3 different companies because all 3 of them specifically told him that he qualified for an offer. And then when he finally brought me into that situation and I looked at his paperwork, and the only reason he brought me in after his 3rd company, the 3rd company stopped answering the phone on him. So the only reason he brought me in, and I looked at his paperwork and I sat down and had a hard discussion and say, you never qualified for an offer and compromise. And it blew his mind. Spent $40,000, 3 different companies, and he didn't qualify for what they were selling. Now, here's what a legitimate firm does. They run your numbers before even naming the resolution. I tell people, I'm going to do what I call a triage. I need to triage your numbers. I need to know how much money you owe, what tax returns were filed, what tax returns haven't been filed, what tax returns need to be filed. How much money are you currently making? What's your assets? Do you own a home? We got to look at all of this stuff. We take all these numbers, and then once we have all these numbers, we're able to make the financial responsible decision of what is the best resolution for your situation. That's the standard. Hold That's what you have to do every single time. Now, chapter 5 in this book, and I'm not going out through all the chapters, I'm just going through portions of this. I call it's the clock they never mentioned. So here's what that means basically. There's a thing called a collection statute expiration date, a CSIN date. That basically what it basically means, IRS generally has about 10 years from the date of an assessment to collect the tax. And after that, the tax debt is gone. Not paid, not deferred, legally uncollectible, gone. Now, the IRS knows this date of your CSIT down to the day. They won't volunteer it. They're not going to remind you. Maybe close to the finishing line. You know what? I've had clients literally that they were convinced they had a six-figure balance for the rest of their lives. We pulled the transcripts and find out they owed zero because the statute dates expired and the balance went to zero. I have individual in Southern California come to me with a huge tax balance. And I told them, I said, before we do anything, I need to see when this tax debts are going to expire. Because here's the thing. If the tax debts are going to expire, we want to let them expire because the IRS can't collect on those tax debts once they've expired. Pull your records, internal records with the IRS. We're going to find out what those dates are. We have an entire strategy we build around that to make sure we're protecting the clock and your debt gets to expire. Okay. So that's why chapter 5 belongs in the book under tax resolution because it's a weapon. Time is our weapon and you should know how to use it because the collector does, the IRS does. It's time that you did too. I want to talk a little bit about chapter 8, the collection process sequence, the process that the IRS has to follow with notices, CP 14, 503, 504, the final notice of intent to levy. These are a series of letters that the IRS are mandated by law to send you before they can do anything. Most people treat these as threats to ignore, but it's an actual timeline of where you are in the collection process. Each one of those letters moves you closer to the enforced collection that's coming. Each one of them has a window to act. And when at the same time, you got to remember penalty pig. Remember that interest that's going up daily? I call him the penalty pig because he just keeps on feeding and getting bigger because of this interest and penalties are compounding. So what we want to make sure is that an IRS revenue officer, or my nickname for him is the hitman, are assigned to your case that the IRS has decided to stop waiting. So bottom line, you're getting these letters, right? All these letters are coming to you, all these different collection letters. The penalty pig is adding up, but it will get to a certain point in time. And it's typically after you get that letter 11, the final notice of levy, and there's a couple of other letters that you may get when an IRS revenue officer is assigned to your case. That's that local individual at your local office. I'm here in Southern California near the San Bernardino office. There's a big IRS office there. So when we have local people that get this letter, we're getting a call from that local IRS revenue officers. It's time to collect and we got to deal with this. I always tell people that's the time. That's the worst thing that can happen to you in your collection process. You have a personally assigned individual that's doing their investigation on you, that's looking into your bank accounts, looking into your assets, trying to figure out how to collect this money from you. And this is not a moment you want to start filling out this web form. Don't even fill out my web form. You need to call our office, 909-570-1103. You need to call us fast because they're going to come after you and they're going to come after full force. They have the right to do a bank levy. All that basically means they can take the money out of your bank account. They have a right to issue a wage garnishment on your check. Typically 25% of your check gone to the IRS. And that's gross revenue coming in. If you're a self-employed business owner, they can take up to 100% of your income. So we need to be ready for that because here's the thing. People always tell me, well, it's not cheap resolving tax debt, right? And sometimes it's not, but here's what's not cheap is when the IRS is taking all your money out of your bank account, or they're taking 25% of your gross pay, or they're taking 100% of your income. Chapter 7, my favorite chapter, the return they filed for you. If you have unfiled returns, the IRS doesn't wait forever. And you know what? I started this business because I had 8 years of unfiled returns. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people do not realize if you have unfiled tax returns, that the IRS or the states or state of California or any other state file what's called a substitute for return or the initial SFR, substitute for return. based on whatever information they've gotten from you. The IRS got third-party information that you were getting a paycheck, that you had business income, interest income, brokerage income, you were paying for real estate. They have a right to file a made-up return, basically what they think your income was and what your tax bill should be based on that made-up income. Now, what's real and they'll do that. They're not going to give you any deductions, no filing status adjustment. They're going to assume they don't care if you were married, if you had kids, none of that stuff. That's the worst possible situation you can be. It's the worst case assessment. It's going to be your largest tax bill. Now, a side note here is in California, the IRS will, or the state of California or Cali Claw, they will make up an assessment based on no third party information, just based on what your occupation was or is or your past occupation. If you were paying interest on a mortgage, they'll make up an amount to make sure that you can afford that mortgage and create a tax bill. Ghost assessments, that's what I call them at least. So just a side note on that California thing. But coming back to the IRS is that if they do file this return on your behalf, is that number becomes your liability and they're going to collect based on that fake number. So here's what's great. You have the right to file a correctly filed return. In most cases, if we file those returns, it will dramatically reduce your balance, maybe even eliminate your balance. So I love this chapter, like I said, personally, because unfiled tax returns need to be dealt with and not from a textbook. And this is from 8 years of my own life. The unfiled return is the foundation of every resolution strategy this book describes. You can't negotiate from a position of non-compliance. Bottom line, if you have unfiled tax returns, we got to file those tax returns. And here's the good news. If you have more than 6 years of unfiled tax returns, we may need to only file 6 of them to get you fully compliant. Give us a call if you want us to have that discussion with you. Chapter 4, I want to talk a little bit about chapter 4 here. We're going to be wrapping up here in a little bit. Stay scanned here and we can take care of this for you. They're even creating a self-help page on the IRS website. If you owe us money, contact us at this number, scan this QR code, and you don't need to hire nobody and you can do this yourself. Yeah, they want you to do that. They want you to represent. They don't want you to have legal representation. What if your tax balance is inaccurate? What if you didn't file a return and you have a past due balance? You call the IRS and they're like, well, yeah, your balance is $100,000, but you're like, well, wait a second. I didn't make that kind of money. And the IRS, they're not going to say, well, you need to do this, file this to replace that income. They're going to do what's in their best interest. So they're not doing this out of kindness because here's the thing. An unrepresented taxpayer almost always gets a worse outcome than a represented one. The IRS knows this and they built it into their system. And I've used this bone saw analogy I talk about in chapter 4. What's a bone saw? Basically, the IRS has type in bone saw. It's a surgical saw for you to cut off a bone if something happens to your arm. So you can literally cut off your arm. You can buy the bone saw for $25. Would you ever use a bone saw on yourself? No, you probably kill yourself doing that, right? The same thing here. The IRS has the power to destroy your life financially. They really do. Completely disrupt your life. And are you willing to go into a match with the IRS with your financial life, not knowing what the rules are? You should not be doing that. It's the same thing with this bone saw. You're not going to use the bone saw. Yeah, you can do it yourself. $25, you can cut off your arm if you need to, but you're not going to do that, right? Especially watching some YouTube tutorial, and be really careful using AI trying to solve your tax problems. Trust me, there's a lot of AI use in the tax industry. Sometimes some of the recommendations just don't make any sense whatsoever. So you want to be careful of that. So bottom line, calling IRS can be a huge mistake. And like I said, I always tell people when they ask me what I do, I'm like, I'm the last tax professional you ever want to hire. It usually means because you have an emergency going on with your tax problems. My job is just to make sure nothing worse happens to you. You hire us. Now, finally, my 3-phase system. This is this entire book, and it's built around 3 phases. No shortcuts, all in the correct order. And I talked about earlier, when somebody gets started with us to help resolve their tax problem, We're doing a phase one triage. What does that mean? Basically, we have to diagnose the problem, guys. When I talk to people on the phone, I tell them when somebody has a medical issue, and as an example, let's just say you woke up and you have an extreme headache in the back of your neck. Now, here's the thing. If you call your doctor and say, I got this extreme headache in back of my neck, I don't know what's going on. Here's what they're not going to tell you. Well, you need to come in next week for brain surgery because you have an extreme neck pain or back headache. They're not going to do that, right? Usually, here's what they're going to do. They're going to have you come in. They're going to triage you. They're going to do blood, labs, x-rays, your symptoms. How long has this been going on? Because here's what a legitimate doctor does. They need to diagnose, right? If you call me up and say you owe 150,000, 10,000, $500,000, I don't say, well, this is what we got to do. We're going to do an offer and compromise. That's what these other companies are doing. Oh yeah, you know what? We're going to settle for pennies on the dollar. They're not going to do that. Here's what we're doing. We're going to pull all your internal records at the IRS. Heck, sometimes I go back to 1990. I want to see everything that's going on. I want to know how much money do you owe? What is the IRS claim that you owe? What tax returns have been filed? What hasn't been filed? Do you qualify for penalty abatements? When is your tax debt going to expire? What are the specific dates on those? We're looking at what letters have you gotten? Has the IRS started the collection process? Do you have a revenue officer sign? We're looking at what notices have you gotten? We know we're going to know where you're at in that collection cycle. We're going to have a strategy come out of that with a real built strategy built on real numbers, not an estimate, not what you remember, but real numbers. We're going to know exactly what the IRS is doing. We're going to have an idea financially where you're at and what options of the 10 options that we have. That's all phase one. That's how we resolve tax problems correctly. We triage it, just like we did in the ambulance. When we came on an emergency scene, we got out. We don't go immediately to the first person, just start, especially if there's multiple people there. You need to triage what's a life and death emergency. What is something that it's a small bruise that we can wait on? You have to triage the scene to make sure that nobody dies while we're dealing with this emergency. You're the exact same way. We're going to figure that out. What's phase two? Stabilize. Here's what I tell you. Once we know what's happening, we need to stabilize the situation. Most missing tax returns. What tax returns need to be filed? What tax returns don't need to be filed? Believe it or not, tax returns could save you tens of thousands of dollars. IRS may not want those tax returns. And multiple situations, people file tax returns they shouldn't have filed. Now they got $100,000 more debt than they should have because they filed returns the IRS never wanted. And they did it because we're trying to save money on our triage. We have to get current on estimated taxes. One thing I always say, a lot of people don't realize the most important tax bill for the IRS is not your past due taxes. It's your future tax bill. Okay. They want to make sure that if they're going to resolve your situation, that you're not owing more taxes in the future. We have to halt active enforcements. We need to communicate with the IRS on your terms. We do the communication, not you. So we do all this so you can focus on your life. This is the phase that earns us the right to negotiate your tax debt, to figure out what's your best resolution. But we can't do this phase if you're not compliant. So the stabilizing sets up what's next is the rescue. And what's the rescue? What's path 3? Once the diagnosis, as we talk about, and we stabilize your situation, now we just got to figure out, how do we resolve this permanently? Is it going to be an installment agreement, partial pay installment agreement? Are you currently not collectible? Do you qualify for an offer and compromise? Are there any penalty abatements? Or is there any statute strategies we need to be thinking about? Whatever fits is built on your specific facts, not something made up by some salesman on the telephone trying to close you. That's what we have to figure out. We have to do all 3: triage, stabilize, rescue, all 3 in the same order every single time, no matter what. And if you're trying to skip one to go to the other, we just don't allow that in our practice. We want to create malpractice in your financial tax situation with your case. So we have to do all 3. Finally, 5 questions. Chapter 12, I talk about the 5 questions you should talk to protect yourself. If you're going to hire somebody, whether you're going to hire me or hire somebody else, you want to know who's going to actually work on your case. That's really important. Is it the person that you're talking to on the phone, or are you talking to a salesperson? Are you going to be talking to a team of people with a 1-800 number that's never going to be answered? Two, how many resolution cases do you handle every single month? That's a great question. You know what? This is a very niche practice. Just like the medical industry has very niche, there's oncologists, there's cardiologists, there's an internist, there's geriatrics, there's very special niches for each. Taxes have become the same way. Don't deal with the tax resolution firm that doesn't understand tax resolution. Are you licensed to represent me? The person that you're talking to on that initial phone call has to be licensed. Are they a licensed enrolled agent, CPA, or attorney that handles the tax resolution? That's the only person you want to be talking to about your tax case, not a salesperson. What's your fee structure? How are you going to charge me? Are you charging me hourly? Are you charging me for individual phase? Are you just giving me a small amount up front just because you're going to hit me with a large amount? We're seeing a lot of that right now. What we're seeing a lot of, oh, it's $500 to get your case started, or even a lot of firms are saying it's free to get your case started before we do anything, and then they turn around and hit you with that massive fee at the back end. I can tell you this, so we charge you for each individual phase because I tell people I don't want to charge you more than what you need to protect yourself. We might do phase one, then come into phase two, and there's no charge because you don't need phase two. Why are we going to charge you for it? Why am I going to tell you I'm going to charge you up front for an offer in compromise only to find out you don't qualify for an offer in compromise? It just needs to be fair. This is hard work. It's not cheap. I'll tell you that right now. Depending on the more complicated, the longer it's going to take, it can get expensive. But expensive is actually very relative in our world. How expensive is it if you're making $10,000 a month and $2,500 a month is going to the IRS because you got a wage garnishment? How expensive is it if you got 2,000, 5,000, 20, $50,000 in your bank account and the IRS and state takes it all in one shot? I've seen that. I see that every single day. How expensive is it if you get a lien on you, a levy on you, anything like that? Number five, what resolution options do you think apply to my situation? Most of the time, just with the basic phone call, based on what you're telling me, and of course, I have to go based on what you're telling me. I can give you an idea of what areas that we're looking at. The top 10 options I mentioned earlier, we give you an idea. This is what we're possibly looking at. But if your firm can't answer any of those five questions, they don't deserve your money. A firm that collects a retainer before running your transcripts is the promise of a promise thief in a suit. And with that is that a lot of these times, these firms try to charge you the entire balance up front, $10,000 to do your offer and compromise, yet they don't know nothing about your case. That's what I'm talking about then. Bottom line, guys, what this book is, this is a book I wish I'd had on the IRS collection process, every stage, every notice, every door, every major resolution option, full menu, honest assessments. We talk about the statute of limitations. What can your tax debt expire? How to spot a firm that's trying to take your money. What a real tax debt analysis or triage produces before a single form is filed. It doesn't replace, bottom line, this book does not replace a professional representation, but it does inform you of what's going to be happening, what needs to happen. I wrote this book because Ernie Madison, God rest his soul, fixed my problem almost 20 years ago. Ernie was that CPA enrolled agent that saved my life, saved my financial life, saved my marriage, unfortunately. And my business is all about him. It really is. It's because of my wife that told me just over 10 years ago, you know what, you should start a business helping other people deal with their tax. And it's because of her, this book was actually dedicated to her. It's because now we've helped hundreds, if not thousands by now, of people solve their tax problems because I know what it costs to carry this thing alone. I talk about the 8 years of unfiled tax returns that I had, but it took almost 15 years before I finally got it all resolved after I got married. I know the shame of having unfiled tax returns. I know the dread of not having to open up your mail, being afraid to answer your telephone, the fear of what if your family finds out, the fear of what if your employer finds out. When that weight is gone, When that number that felt almost impossible, and then we show you the light at the end of the tunnel, that's what we're offering. It's not a miracle, but it is a process. I've lived both sides of this now. I've had the tax problems. Now I resolve the tax problems. Bottom line, where you go next, where do you go next now? You got the book, you downloaded the book. If you haven't gotten the book and you're watching this video first, go to taxdebtbook.com and get the book. Taxdebtbook.com, you can get that free. The book is for free. The PDF version is for free. If you want a hard copy of that book, I always suggest go to Amazon.com. You can get the hard copy of the book. It's a few bucks there. Heck, if you book an appointment and come to my office, I will give you a copy of the book. Everybody that comes to my office, they get a copy of this book for free. But bottom line, if you currently have active enforcement right now, in other words, they're actively coming after you right now, you don't have time to fill out a form. You don't have time to read the book. Call us, 703. We answer that phone 24 hours a day. That phone is answered 24 hours a day. So if you're worried about, or even if that hasn't happened, if you're worried that could happen at any time, you need to give us a call. You can also go to calltaxea.com. You can actually book an appointment on my calendar. You see what's available. Just book that appointment. Here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna just tell me what you're dealing with it, and I'm gonna take it from there. That's what we're gonna be doing. So again, here's the book one more time. Want to share that book with you. Family operated business. Elizabeth, my partner, she's the lady in charge here. She handles all the documents that the IRS is dealing. My son, U.S. Navy veteran, Navy Academy graduates, an enrolled agent. He's helping me have this fight too. But we're ready to help you when you're ready to help yourself. It comes down to that. If you're ready to help yourself, we're ready to help you. Thank you for watching this, and see you on the other side. Take care.